I think this is the worst DM advice that a majority of the D&D community seems to support. So if you continue to follow this advice, that's fine, but this video is my warning to the D&D community. For some, this might seem brutally obvious, but hit points do matter. The tracking of monster hit points is important, and DMs who don't track hit points for their monsters are doing a disservice to their players. Quite frankly, I think it is just unfair, and makes combat lose pretty much all meaning. If you're not tracking hit points, then at the end of the day, combat is arbitrary. It is by definition arbitrary. So why would any players feel any sort of accomplishment for winning a combat? They absolutely shouldn't. And then think about the players who make characters that are specifically combat oriented, whether that be dealing a ton of damage, healing, buffing, etc. That particular build that they maybe spent hours working on is predicated on the fact that hit points exist and they matter. You're pulling the rug out from underneath those players. The sense of accomplishment from combat comes from two different factors. One is the narrative factor. At the end of a combat, maybe you defeated a villain's lieutenant. That's a big deal in the context of the larger campaign, so that makes us feel good. But then there is the second factor, which is a bit of pride. You overcame a combat through your tactics, your wits, and your knowledge of your character. You thought creatively and you solved the problem in front of you. But for dungeon masters who just have the combat end once everyone does something cool, well gosh, there is no sense of accomplishment. The entire party could have gone brain dead for the 2 hours it took to finish that combat and nothing would have changed. Well, of course, unless you, the dungeon master, wanted it to. If you, as a game master, are not tracking hit points at all in whatever system, then I, as a player, think that I could have been doing other things for the past 2 hours. TTRPG combat doesn't have the graphics of video games or a constant engagement, because you have to wait for players to take their turns. The engagement comes from you understanding the rules of the game and your character sheet, and then applying them in combat. But without hit points, then those actions don't matter. Hit points make player actions matter in D&D and in so many other systems. Hit points are part of the shared covenant between the dungeon master and the players. If you break that trust between player and dungeon master, bad things can happen to your game. I'm always blown away when I have to argue this fact. To me, it is such a basic covenant between the dungeon master and their players. As a player, I feel happy when we win, even if I didn't get the final kill, because all of my actions leading up to it either helped keep my teammates up or they took down enemy health, so that everything along the way was building on itself. It was adding up to something. But if it is completely up to DM discretion, all the actions I took beforehand, they do not matter. And I'll get into other thoughts on hit points and adjusting them later on in this video, but really this video is a warning for new dungeon masters. This advice can destroy gaming groups, because more often than not, the players will eventually realize what you're doing, and then all bets are off. There was a time when I was a player in a game, there was a relatively new dungeon master, and being an experienced DM, I caught on pretty darn quickly that they weren't really keeping track of hit points. They told me out of game a little while later, so it's confirmed. I want to tell you guys this. I'm not just pulling this out of my hat. I noticed it, and then I was told out of game. And at one point, I'm sitting there and I had really started to check out during combats because I realized, alright, I need to do my one cool thing, and then I need to keep all the other players up until they do their cool thing, and then we'll be done. And at some point, at the end of a general arc, we fought a boss of that general mission, and after that, one of the other players brought it up. They're like, hey, how many hit points did that boss have? And the dungeon master didn't know. They said something like, like 250? That player went, no, because I was keeping track of how much damage we did. We did like 170 damage. The lieutenant of this boss, that we fought a few sessions earlier, they had 300 health. And before long, the cat was out of the bag. All the players began to realize, wait a minute, these hit points do not matter. And all the moments that they thought they had achieved evaporated like dust. The gaming group quickly died after that. The DM was shocked. They're like, I thought you were having a good time. And I had to sit down and explain, we thought we were having a good time because we thought we were playing the same game. We thought that we were achieving something. And again, this is a situation where the players themselves could find out. Players are not stupid. Players can think critically. They can look at something and go, yeah, we did less damage in that fight, but it was easier. Why? So for all those out there saying, don't track hit points at all, yeah, no, that's crazy. Once players find out what you're doing, that you've been lying to them, they are going to go ballistic. I think it is madness to give the advice to not track hit points, because it breaks the trust between DM and player. Part of any tabletop RPG game is a collective sense of trust between the dungeon master and the players. Now, I don't want to say that you can't adjust hit points at all, but there are certain things that I definitely believe you should not do. I'm completely okay if you're a new dungeon master and you made this egregious mistake in combat and you gave the enemies far too many or far too few hit points. Mistakes happen. I argue that you probably shouldn't be adjusting hit points in combat, but for newer DMs, happy to give that leeway. You're still figuring things out and your players should probably understand that. You don't know how many hit points are too much or too few, and that just comes with experience because the challenge rating system in D&D 5th edition is broken. Now, if you're a more experienced DM with 2 or 3 campaigns under your belt, you probably shouldn't be adjusting hit points mid-combat. I think for me, as long as the hit points are set before the combat actually starts, it's fine. Maybe combat is about to start and you look at that hit point total and you realize, oh man, I don't know what past me was thinking, but this number is not right. Then I am completely okay with the DM changing that, but as long as it's set in combat, we're good. Because then it's preserving that trust between DM and players. Because the worst situation I found is when a player whips out an amazing combo that they've been saving up for sessions and sessions, and then you adjust the boss's hit points mid-fight to make sure the combat lasts longer. Quite frankly, if you do that, I think that's an asshole move. That was a big moment for that player, and you just robbed it from them. So I also think adjusting hit points mid-combat is a dangerous game that experienced dungeon masters really should have gotten past. Because I'm here to tell you from experience that if you're paying attention to monster stat blocks and your player characters, you can build combats without the need to adjust hit points mid-combat. It is completely unnecessary if you know what you're doing. And again, new dungeon masters, ton of leeway. But if you tell me that you've been DMing for more than 3 years and you're still adjusting hit points mid-combat, I'm going to look at you a little funny. But then for some people online to openly tell new dungeon masters not to track hit points, I think that is crazy. Actual madness. But you know what? I acknowledge maybe I'm missing something. Maybe there is a reason to risk your entire D&D campaign to not track hit points. Maybe there is a reason to take away a player's big moment by just increasing the number of hit points a boss has in the middle of combat. So tell me in the comments below if I'm missing something. Because I've seen it so many times now, and the advice still just keeps on coming. I don't know why you would risk the trust of your players. This, I think, is the worst advice that you could possibly give a new dungeon master. Hit points are important. You should track hit points accurately. You should care about hit points. Obviously, it's your game. You can do what you want. You can throw out this advice, but please don't forsake the warning. Now, if hit points and planning for combat is difficult for you, I suggest checking out this video right here. I break down how I prep for combat. It's simple, it's easy, you can do it. I believe in you, and thank you for entering the dungeon.